Askreddit asks, teachers of Reddit, when can you tell if a student is going through depression or self-loathing? If so, what do you try to do to help?
Any change in behavior, usually personal hygiene, attendance, level of interaction. But honestly, as a once extremely suicidal grad student, it was surprising how little people noticed. I showed up for work for barely 4 to 5 hours. I was quite a bit withdrawn. But I also overcompensated. Sometimes I'd make an effort to dress nicely, be more cheerful because I didn't want anyone to see what was really going on. I'd hang around till almost midnight to make up for lost hours. Depressed behavior is often contradictory. There's no one way to predict. Some people withdraw. Some people throw themselves into things further in an effort to distract. You are seeing them for a few hours a day. It is hard to tell what's going in their life. That's why any change from baseline is important, doesn't matter which direction it moves in. For me, it didn't end well. I'm still alive and I suppose that's good.
You're describing what I was like last year, after which I dropped out of graduate school. I wasn't suicidal, but I'm not suicidal was the best thing that I could say sometimes. I think one person may have noticed.
It's always hard to know. So the best thing you can do is let them know you care. If you start with a casual one-on-one connection and make it known that you'd like to listen, you can sometimes save a life.
I used to work in schools and I have to say that I always saw the kids I knew needed help as often as I could. They were the kids who didn't have supplies, didn't turn in work, had unreachable parents, were quiet, got bullied, etc., essentially not thriving.
My general ed psychology professor is some fancy head of the psychology department in our school. She handed around flyers, papers to our college's student health center, and spent about 30 minutes talking to all, approximately 100 of us in our huge lecture hall about mental health. She mentioned the procedures, such as how it's basically like asking for advice, and it's not a scary place. She mentioned how, when you get sick, you don't say you're diseased. When you break your finger, you don't call yourself disabled. When you go to your doctor for a checkup, you're not always sick. Sometimes you're just getting checked in. She mentioned how seeking mental help, or seeking mental evaluation, can both just be that, mental checkups for yourself, and for those who felt guilty about their mental illness. It doesn't mean to negatively generalize your whole self as negatively ill or broken. She basically made everyone feel human. And sometimes our brain, head, or body gets sick sometimes. She kept mentioning how our college's mental health services are all free if you're a student, and how everyone in that room qualifies for it. She asked everyone who's interested in going, and who plans to go, and few students raised their hands in relief. I was already debating to go because of my mental struggles, but hesitated every time I passed by that student health area for about a year. The paper she gave us mentioned how we can call or just walk in. The paper even mentioned how it doesn't have to be about stress, just about how to help shape us for healthier mental lives. It mentioned confidentiality, and a place where one doesn't have to feel ashamed of their illness or struggles. This happened about a week ago, so I'm still a little emotional by writing this. So my words might be a little everywhere. Either way, I'm still too afraid to go to the health building in person. But I have been seeking professional online resources support now. It's a small step, and I know people have to push themselves to get better, like still getting a shot, despite being afraid. But just hearing this professor open arms and remove some fears really relieved some doubts and fear about seeking help. Small edit. She also made a big deal about always asking and seeking for help, despite if it's asking a teacher, manager, boss, parent, friend, etc., until you get help. She said to keep seeking until you get the help you need. I have high respect for her. One thing I would personally add is to keep note of things that do and don't work. If a parent helping you isn't enough, take note of that. Seek, ask more. If a teacher isn't helping, Seek, ask more, possibly a professional. If a specific professional doesn't help, seek a different one, type. It almost feels like an endless search. But I believe one has to make a huge deal about seeking help. Because you're a big deal.
This question needs a good discussion.
This question needs a serious tag.
That's the biggest issue in the US, I'd say, is increasing class size. They don't get paid enough and they're overworked. And they can't even make connections with students.
In a year of substituting, the biggest thing I've learned is this. If a student doesn't seem right, they aren't. If you ever think to yourself, that's a strange thing to say, that's not normal for that age group, it's because it isn't. My first week a 5th grade boy said to me, "You look like my stepdad, I am a giant burly, bearded man, but you don't seem mean like him. Are you going to stick around?" My heart fucking broke. I excused myself and had the special ed aide look over my class while I went directly to the counselors.
Good on you for telling the counselors. I hope it all worked out for that kid.
Not a teacher, but I was a student going through this. I was in a small town with virtually no mental health resources. I was lucky enough to have a few teachers see what I was going through and cut me a bit of slack after watching me go through DHR battles with heavy abuse at home. I went from being a model student with straight A's to someone who showed up when I wanted with no work to turn in. One teacher in particular started inviting me to dinner, and she requested me as her student aide during my free periods. She would ask me how my home life was, and if things were bad she'd plan sleepovers with her daughter who I'd become close friends with. She made me feel like I was welcome in at least one spot in my life. She and her daughter made me feel loved when I wasn't at home. She probably saved my life in high school.
I'm not a teacher, but I work within in schools. I know teachers that have cried in the car on the way home because they know their students are suffering with depression and that low self-esteem is eating them alive. Yes, a lot of the time it is very easy to tell if a student is depressed. Kids, even older teens, aren't as good at being mysterious and closed off as they imagine. Most of them are absolutely desperate for adult attention and validation. The big problem is that a lot of the answers aren't appealing or cool. Getting them resources sometimes helps. But that might mean pointing out the issue and/or talking to CPS or their parents about what's going on. Most kids just want teachers to back off. And that's just not possible most of the time. But they can be a little generous with grading. They can offer extra time. Or just an acknowledgement that things suck right now. They can urge teens to do something they hate, staying off social media. Which tends to help. It's hard because teachers have so many responsibilities. And being a mental health worker isn't something they're often equipped to do. But they can provide unconditional positive regard and support students. Even in small ways. They can be kind. They can take those small moments to make students feel acknowledged and cared for. So many teachers are out there working on solutions. Trying to get more counselors at schools right now. Most high schools have literally hundreds and hundreds of students per counselor. But because that type of stuff is expensive, it's really hard.
You can tell by changes in attitudes, participation, and grades. These aren't the only indicators. But they are the ones I key off of for my students. All you can do is make yourself available. There are certain things we are required to report. But all of my students know that if they are having an issue, my door is open, and confidential unless it is a mandatory reporting issue. I am upfront with them that there are some things I have to pass along because I don't want to betray their trust. When students do come to me with concerns, I let them talk. A lot of the time, there isn't much I can actually do, other than be a sounding board for them. I'll make suggestions after they are done if I think they would benefit from speaking to a counselor or give advice if they wanted. I always ask for non-reporting issues if they would like me to inform their other teachers so they know what is going on. And if they say no, it stops with me. If they say yes, it is usually because they are not comfortable bringing it up themselves. Even if students don't say anything, as a group we let each other know if we notice something is off. Because if they don't talk to me, they might talk to another teacher.
I don't know if this belongs here, but I'm going to put it here anyway because it's important in discussions like this. Depression does not mean quiet and reserved. It can mean a variety of symptoms. When I was dealing with depression, I became more outgoing and loud, cracking jokes and trying to get people to talk to me. And, whenever someone shut me down, I took it harder than the average extrovert. I'm extremely introverted by the way, saying, look for the quiet kid, isn't always helpful. I personally had a 2-year period of depression that wasn't characterized by isolation. While depression can certainly manifest as quietness, keeping that narrow-mindedness is hurting the people who are suffering but trying to keep a brave face.
Nothing you can do sadly. Just try to understand their situation and be lenient when they aren't participating in class. My best friend committed suicide after his older brother committed suicide. The teachers would badger him on not turning in homework and not paying attention in class so much that it drove him to his own demise. Just tell the student that you want them to smile and do well in the class. As for signs of depression, if the student is quiet and pushes other students away, that's a good indicator. If their grades are dropping, that's another indicator. If they were cheerful and walked into class stoked to learn but aren't as vocal or outgoing, then try to ask them if something is going on. I remember one particular teacher that told my friend that she would call the authorities if he said he wanted to kill himself. Don't do that. Just be a sympathetic ear the student can pour their feelings into.
Not sure actually. They're all constantly saying they're dead inside and joke about being depressed.
Being casually suicidal.
That's where we get you. The ones who actually want to die are using it as a coping mechanism, while those who don't are making fun of how stupid the thought of suicide is to them. I'm not a teacher, but in my senior year of high school, I went through a very rough patch towards the end. I missed 80+ days of school and barely graduated. At the time I had a phenomenal creative writing teacher. She noticed the work I turned in, as well as my plummeting attendance to class. And when the final project was assigned, which I was not there for, she confronted my group and said to them, if Space Reindeer doesn't do her part, she's going to fail my class, which she needs to graduate. You all need to grow up and reach out a hand to your classmate in need. Each of my group members would individually text me to remind me to complete my project work on time. I know their grades were dependent on it too. But the support they gave me really helped lift me up and actually try to finish strong. I don't think I would have passed that class without them or without that teacher.
First and foremost, let's put substitute teachers through proper training.
Yes, I am so anxious anytime I have to take even a half day. Because it is inevitable that the sub will find a way to escalate a situation with one of my kids into an all-out crisis. You, crazy woman, are the adult and did not need to declare war a middle schooler who doesn't have a developed frontal lobe.
Who and why did this get gilded? I'm about to go to sleep and I get these digital medals? Thank you. Anonymous Redditor. Do I have to babysit this?
I would say our award speech edits, but I feel okay about this one.
Nose goes.
We were talking about self-harm and suicide in class, and this kid raises his arm and puts it down just as quickly. I call on him and he just kinda shrugged it off and said nothing is wrong. Later in the semester I had a conference with this kid's parents and the dad is ripping the kid for getting mostly A's and a B. I mean, above the normal you can do better thing most parents do when they are disappointed. It still haunts me that I didn't get the kid to open up to me and ask what's truly wrong in his life. I think about it daily and feel like a horrible person for not doing more to help this student.
First year of teaching, student comes in, having a really rough day. We were talking about predestination through Calvinism. After class he asks me if God predetermined that his baby brother was supposed to die the previous night. Long story short, his mother was beaten by his stepfather and miscarriage. Obviously I was shocked. I contacted the office and they said there was nothing they could do for him. So I spent 2 hours after school that day letting him vent and get it all off his chest. I simply couldn't let him go home for the weekend without talking to someone other than family. You just gotta look for the signs. Sometimes they are not clear. And sometimes the signs are blatant.
I remember a teacher just asking me, "Hey Cheese Whiz, is there anything going on?" while on a field trip in a boat. It felt like the pressure I had on me just left that instant. I finally had someone that really cared and listened to me.
Wow. You too? That literally happened to me yesterday, or on Thursday. Not sure. I was going back from a field trip and yeah. I ended up talking about my anxiety. Turned out the teacher had some too.
It's often hard to tell. And even when we suspect something, it's hard to do anything that will actually help. This semester I see 126 different students over the course of a typical day. As much as I'd like to, it's simply not possible for me to get to know all of my students on anything close to a personal level. I can't be on the lookout for changes in students' behavior if I don't know what their normal behavior is. My school identifies certain students as being at risk, based on home life, grades, etc., and assigns each teacher 2 of those students to mentor. I try to check in regularly with my mentees, as well as any student who seems to be acting differently. Of course, depression doesn't just strike the type of person my school labels at risk. Even if I notice that something seems off about a student, quiet when they're usually loud, loud when they're usually quiet, avoiding usual friends, unusual amount of missing work, etc., there isn't always much I can do. Depressed people don't want others to know they are depressed. My typical strategy is to quietly pull the student aside and just ask how they are doing. I've gotten everything from "great, no problems here," to "my stepdad called me a worthless piece of shit this morning," and "my ex-girlfriend is pregnant but she isn't sure if it's mine," and "I'm failing 4 classes so I'm afraid I won't graduate," and "I think you're about to send me to the principal because I have chewing tobacco in my mouth." If nothing else, I try to be a listening ear. Many of my students don't really have that. The counselors at my school are actually pretty good at helping struggling kids. So if someone needs to talk but doesn't want to talk to me, I put them in touch with the counselor. If a student says they are fine, but I think they might be struggling with depression or something related, I'll reach out to their other teachers, the coaches, and the school counselor to relay my concerns. We'll keep a close eye on the student, but we can't do much else without anything concrete. I've reached out to parents before if I have serious concerns.
Is this actually a normal thing? I don't even know if my teachers even knew what I sounded like. No one gave a fuck about me. I skipped classes constantly, couple times for 2 weeks. Never spoke to anyone. Had a hat covering my whole face. There was clearly something wrong with me and no one ever in their life ever even batted an eye towards me. I was the only kid in every class to not say anything. Everyone had their friends, I had literally no one. I sat alone in a corner. As a teacher, this makes me sad. I wish you would have been in my class.
At the moment I can say what not to do. I've very recently had a student with very serious and noticeable self-harm marks. This student had several suicide attempts last year, none at school. Thankfully the student is getting treatment, but that doesn't stop other students from isolating her. Even worse, the school admins from telling her she is contagious and should stay away from other students lest she give them bad ideas. She definitely needs more one-on-one help and encouragement, which I'm still figuring out how to do.
That is horrible.
You know, I don't really know what the teacher can do, but looking back I was seriously depressed for a couple years in high school. I just absolutely quit caring about my grades. Didn't care if I got in trouble, etc. I'd sleep through class and eventually pretty much told my teachers that I didn't care and they should just quit giving me work. This was all handled as a discipline issue. But nobody ever really tried to figure out why, like I was never sent to a counselor. Nobody ever really engaged with my mum. It was just a bunch of detentions. Everything worked out, but I sorta wish somebody had sat me down and figured out I was depressed and told my mum so she'd get me into therapy to work out my shit. Obligatory, not a teacher in bipolar and had a rough home life. I spent almost a third of high school in mental health facilities. It seemed like I'd be in for a week or two, be okay for a week or two, spiral and go back in. My schoolwork was constantly disrupted because of the hospital stays, and even when I was home I had a really hard time getting myself to do the work. My school was small and had a packed spec ed program. The alternative high school was almost an hour from home, so I was basically told to suck it up, and my teachers were told to give me some lenience on deadlines. Even with those accommodations I wouldn't have graduated if it weren't for my senior year English teacher. She knew that my grades weren't bad because I was stupid or because I wasn't doing the reading. I'm a huge reader and she picked some pretty great books. But an issue of not having the mental energy to actually do the work. Normally I'd be able to get through my research and thesis but not be able to actually sit down to write the essay. So every time an essay was due she would allow me to present orally. In private, in the 30-minute gap between when school got out and when the buses left. Basically, we would talk about the book for 15 minutes. I would present my arguments for the assignment. Give quotes straight from the book, tabs in my copy. ECT. It was a huge thing for me. I was able to free up the time I spent stressing about not writing my English homework and actually do some of the math or chemistry. She saw that I was struggling and adapted her teaching style to me. I'll forever be grateful to you, Ms. B. There's no way I'd be where I am without you.
My arts teacher stepped in when I was clearly suffering from male anorexia and sat me down. Told me where I could find help and that there's no shame in boys seeking help for mental problems, and supported me throughout the whole process. Even with a hugely unsupportive family. I owe her so much, but sadly she retired and I never could go back to say thanks. Opening parenthesis dot. Search her in the directory. Contact the school and ask if they have a forwarding address. As a teacher myself, students don't realize how much a thank you can mean, even years down the line.
I'll tell you what most teachers do to help. Nothing. Or send you off to the school therapist who are underqualified and frankly doesn't give a fuck about the child's feelings as long as they ask the questions on the sheet in front of them.
Obligatory. I'm not a teacher, but I'm a high school student with a few things to say. First of all, don't beat yourself up if you can't notice the warning signs. It's hard to tell when you're doing a job that requires you focus on everybody and the subject matter. So you can't dedicate a lot of time towards one student. Also, you don't have a whole lot of time with your students, depending on your school. An hour every day can go by really fast. Sometimes, all you can do is just be there for your students. Let them know they can count on you to help. Be approachable and kind, if you're a good teacher. It shouldn't really interfere with your strictness. During school, I almost lost both of my parents. One of my English teachers knew about this and never bothered to approach me or ask if I was okay. Eventually, I broke down crying during one of my music classes. Then ran outside to hide it. When I came back in, my music teacher asked if I was okay and I just nodded. He shook his head, hugged me. Then said, "No, you're not okay." For the rest of the period, he allowed to hide in one of the practice rooms and cry my heart out. Letting me know he was available if I ever needed anything. It's small, but it meant the world to me. If you notice something is wrong or if you know there's something going on, all you have to do is comfort them to make a difference. You don't have to wait until someone has a breakdown to tell your students you care about them. Make it known.
Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe to support the channel, and above all, have an excellent day, you amazing people.